What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
Praising.
So recently we heard President Trump use the term alt-left to describe the counter-protesters who were present at Unite the Right in Charlottesville. What exactly does he mean by alt-left? Well, stripping away the vague terminology, we see two main groups who comprise the opposition at Charlottesville. The left anarchists, better known in the public eye as anti-fascists or Antifa for short, and Black Lives Matter. These labels are well established and recognizable to people who are politically engaged, and I see no reason not to continue using them. The term alt-left, on the other hand, is rather nonsensical in that it's being fielded as a counterpart to the term alt-right, a sort of playground retort in an attempt to equate the public activities of Antifa with those of the alleged neo-Nazi boogeymen who constituted the attendees of Unite the Right. But let's think about this a little more. Where did the term alt-right come from? It originated from the remnants of paleoconservatism, itself an implicit embodiment of nationalism and white American identity. Alt-right refers to a coalition of dissident right-wing perspectives, be they identitarian, southern nationalist, monarchist, traditionalist, neo-reactionary, or anything outside the purview of mainstream neoconservatism. In short, the term alt-right and the associated spheres of political thought and discussion arose out of a palpable need for an alternative to the neoconservative stranglehold over what is considered acceptable in right-wing politics. It was a rejection of the internationalist and multiculturalist policies of the George Bushes and Ronald Reagans of the political landscape. The term alt-left has no such void to fill and no such cultural or social precedent. Truth is, it doesn't seem to have much of a precedent at all, and the Urban Dictionary entry for alt-left was just created on the 16th of August 2017, likely in the wake of President Trump's use of the term. Examining archive sites like archive.is and archive.org turns up almost no results prior to 2016, with the exception of a small Twitter account and associated blog called alt-left. Nothing really stands out about it, however, as it boasts run-of-the-mill articles about such standard left-wing subjects as the UK's Labour Party. Vice journalist Eve Pazer recently penned an article entitled "Stop Saying Alt-Left," in which she also complains that the term alt-left doesn't really have any meaning. According to Eve, the term appears to have been popularized by Hillary Clinton supporters in the summer of 2016 as a way of dismissing those to the left of them. "Don't punch left, you're hurting the resistance." Quoting Eve, back then, the phrase was largely synonymous with Bernie bro, which, if you recall, was an invention of the Clinton campaign used to frame Sanders supporters as misogynists. The alt-left became somewhat of a mainstream liberal talking point in the summer of 2016 thanks to prominent pundits like Nation writer and MSNBC contributor Joan Walsh. Personally, the very first time I'd ever heard this term was just after the 2016 election, when Sean Hannity in his neoconservative wisdom also used it to describe Antifa and Black Lives Matter in the same fashion Trump is now doing.
I talk about the alt-radical left. Who are these people? Occupy?
Yeah.
Right? Occupy?
Yeah.
They are
Occupy Wall Street.
MoveOn.org. Black Lives Matter. Pigs in a blanket fry 'em like bacon. What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them now?
It seems to be a total creation of the legacy media, and we know that President Trump is a regular viewer of Fox News. So I think it's reasonable to assume that Trump heard this term from Hannity and has now adopted it for himself. But the reality is this: unless you're a left anarchist or a communist, there isn't much of a void to be filled within the hegemony of the broader left-wing paradigm. Left-wing ideas are the standard in public academia, in most of the legacy media, and in much of the corporate sector, as evidenced by the recent behavior of all of these entities with regard to the rise of Trump and the alt-right.
To equate a group that is a protest group, two protest groups, yes, they're both protest groups, and they're talking about Antifa or Antifa, however you want to pronounce it, calling them the alt-left. Well, that group protests fascism, so they were there protesting fascism. Maybe their tactics weren't exactly right. All groups like that, political groups, rights groups, protest groups, it's messy. But there is a difference between the two groups. One is a Nazi white supremacist group. What they want to do, and in their hearts, is extinguish people who look like me and who look like you, Wolf. Jewish people, black people, even women. They don't think that we're equal to them. The other is a protest group protesting a political and a racist movement. Now, I'm not saying either of them, I'm not saying that that group, all of their tactics were right, but they were there protesting hate in America.
Don Lemon certainly isn't out in the streets adorned with black bloc garb, throwing Molotov cocktails at police and smashing storefront windows, and he would never openly say that he supports those activities, but he certainly does a good job of diminishing the level of violence and vitriol embodied by them. After all, they're anti-fascist, so they must be the good guys, right? The term anti-fascist itself is arguably already a loose analog to the term alt-right, if only in the sense that it represents a broad coalition of radical left politics. Left anarchists, socialists, Marxist-Leninists, and a host of other niche political identities, which ultimately all fall under the umbrella of communism. And yet, even these radical stripes of leftist political thought are really just the terminating point of egalitarian, progressive, and academic social justice rhetoric. Hence why less extreme folks such as Don Lemon, Kyle Kulinski, Democratic Representative Maxine Waters, and other progressives will happily cover for them. It hardly makes sense to refer to groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter as alternatives to the mainstream left when the mainstream left, be they progressives, left liberals, social science academics, and legacy media personalities, have all made a habit of running interference for these groups and are either downplaying or outright endorsing their behavior and tactics. By contrast, the alt-right rarely, if ever, receives cover from mainstream neoconservatives. Even the alt-right's closest ideological neighbors in the so-called alt-light, such as Paul Joseph Watson, are hesitant to give the same kind of cover that progressives and Democrats provide to Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Sure, they go around picking fights with people and causing millions of dollars in property damage. I'm not saying I agree with that, says the mainstream progressive, but at least they're against those evil racists and Nazis. How can you argue with that? Meanwhile, the neoconservative politician or pundit trips over himself to disavow anyone on the dissident right, anyone who might dare point out demographic peculiarities of crime, or misguided choices regarding foreign policy, or objections to mass immigration, or any other unapproved thoughts and behaviors. The neocon would rather get his good boy points from progressives and left liberals than take his own side and risk being called racist, sexist, or bigoted. With recognition of this distinction, it becomes obvious that Antifa and Black Lives Matter are merely part of the establishment left's diversity of tactics. They are an extreme manifestation of ideas which otherwise pass themselves off as warm, fuzzy, and acceptable in polite society. Mainstream progressives and left liberals hold the reins of the relevant institutions, and so they don't feel the need to disavow their extremists the way they routinely disavow anyone to the right of John McCain, anyone who steps ever so slightly out of the boundaries of the broader neoliberal paradigm. This contrasts with the mainstream right's willingness to disavow those who move right of them, and as a result, the term alt-left seems unlikely to have the desired effect of fomenting division amongst the left writ large. And just like that, the term alt-left begins to sound like total nonsense. What exactly is it an alternative to? What are these so-called alt-left people doing other than acting as foot soldiers of establishment progressivism, doing what academics and journalists and Democratic Party members only wish they could do themselves? The answer is nothing.
Praising